What's new? Something's different, right? First things that's different are these two guitars and the couch behind me. In short, I am not at my usual recording space, and in order for me to get this video out tomorrow, I decided let's just record here while we're at it. Alright, so here we are. Now, today's video is about the mini budget. What is the mini budget? The mini budget is not a budget that you write on a small piece of paper or simplified budget. The mini budget is a speech given in the interim between the budget speeches, which usually happens in February. Now, one thing we love about South Africa is that every time you have to take your car for a service, there's a new finance minister in charge. Not necessarily a good thing, but it started with Trevor Manuel, who was appointed the Minister of Finance under Nelson Mandela. Then thereafter there was Pravin Gordhan, and thereafter there was first Des van Rooyen, which served for an entire week. There was Nhlanhla Nene that replaced Des van Rooyen. Then there was Pravin Gordhan again, and then Nhlanhla Nene again, and then currently we have Tito Mboweni. After a shocking reveal by Nhlanhla Nene being involved with hashtag GuptaGate. So that's why South Africa is interesting. We have all these many different ministers of finance so frequently. But every time a new minister of finance or a new political leader in any position essentially is appointed, the first thing they say, or the first speech they deliver, the first thing that comes out is to root out the corruption. Now, rooting out corruption is a very honorable and worthy cause. However, this can only happen if corruption is absent from the individual that says they're going to root out corruption. So, just a comment on that. But our budget speech. The first budget speech is given in February of every year. And during that speech, the Minister of Finance essentially outlines the fiscal situation or the financial situation of government. Then around the 3rd or 4th week of October every year, they have the mini budget, in which they adjust what was said in the main budget speech in February and also provide a bit of a forecast as to what we can expect in the next budget. So, a couple of things came from Tito Mboweni's budget speech. Now, first off, Tito Mboweni, in my opinion, is a very good candidate for the Minister of Finance. He's economically backgrounded. He understands how the economy works. And with a presiding president such as Cyril Ramaphosa, they will know exactly what they're doing, be that good or bad as it may. So I cannot comment on their intent, but I have at least the confidence that they will know what they're doing, which is a good thing. So, first thing Tito Mboweni said is, well, one of the first things that came to be, or that came out of the budget speech, is that there is a bit of a revision that has to happen between what's currently what's the current position in South Africa in terms of our economy. Now, our economy is generally measured on what's called the gross domestic product, and the gross domestic product is simply a sum or the total of all the products and services that were produced or delivered during a financial year. It's literally just a measure of the economic activities in the country. How many people bought what for how much, whether it was a product or a service, whatever. The GDP is literally just a summary of that. And growth in GDP for developing countries, and this I quote directly from his speech, developing countries are now expected to grow by 4.7% in 2018 and 2019. For 2018, unfortunately, South Africa's growth forecast has been revised down from 1.5% to 0.7%. So growth is expected to recover gradually to over 2% in 2021 as confidence returns and investment gathers. Now, first of all, growing countries, which is the BRICS countries and other areas that's not associated with BRICS, is growing on average by 4.7% for the 2019 financial year, but South Africa is not even meeting our initial expectation of 1.5%. They're expecting a 0.7% growth. That's bad. But at least it's still positive. Now, we are currently in a financial recession or a technical recession. However, if this turns out to be true, then at least we will have come out of that recession in February, which is a good thing. Any kind of growth, albeit low, is a good thing for me. Then, with Cyril Ramaphosa and Tito Mboweni, they've worked together and they've developed a economical turnaround strategy for government. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa has been busy with this for quite a while, but in the budget speech, they've mentioned 5 things that they will be taking into consideration throughout the financial year, and I'm just going to list them over here. The first is the implementation of growth-enhancing economic reforms. Then the second, reprioritization of public spending to support growth and job creation. Now, this is also evident from the reallocations of the budget amounts of funding from the speech. 3 is enhancing infrastructure investment and establishing an infrastructure fund. Now, this infrastructure fund that they mention here is simply a way for them to reinvest into the country in terms of long-term benefits being provided in the country. The 4th is addressing urgent and pressing matters in education and health, and from the budget speech they are reallocating millions to focus on education and health. Just as a quick overview, one thing they're doing is they're going to make sure that they've got running water and sanitation in every school in the country. That's a big job and a very hairy, audacious goal for them, but it's achievable. And the reallocation of funds tells me that this is actually a priority and it's in all likelihood plausible. The other aspect is that they have reallocated about 250 million rand to increase services by public sector servants. Now, I'm of the opinion that this 250 million should be allocated to appointing new service providers and educating those new service providers, which is at ground level. In public health, those are your nurses, your doctors, your allied medicals, like your occupational therapists, audiologists, speech therapists, dietitians. Those are those people that need to have those jobs created for them. And then they've also added an additional 150 for the next year or two, to 150 million for the next year or two to go through and assist with this kind of thing and to do beds and services and equipment for areas where that's needed. So that's for me a very positive thing, and it means they're actually going ahead with providing the service that they intend to provide under the National Health Insurance Scheme. So for me, that's a good thing. Option 5 is investing in municipal social infrastructure improvement. Now, they are spending quite a bit of time and effort on municipalities and parastatals. From within this budget, they're reallocating millions upon millions just to go through strengthening the internal auditing processes and corporate governance within municipalities and parastatals, which is a very good thing. But again, this can only happen if they've got people with integrity and loyalty and a strong backbone in those positions. And this is personal opinion, but I'm not sure whether that is the case. One other area that they've mentioned specifically is the Giyani water project and the Vaal water river system. Now these two areas need significant infrastructure improvements, and they're applying that. But part of these improvements and part of the funds allocated to that is to assist our authorities, TCTA or whoever, to investigate other plausible water systems in the country. I quote Tito Mboweni, "Water is critical. Current water delivery models are not working in many cases, and we need to consider new ideas and models." One other thing is that they've actually started to take the South African army, the military, to get involved with these water, I don't want to say rehabilitation, but these water review projects. Over the next couple of years, they're also going to spend a lot of money in the infrastructure fund. They specifically mentioned 855.2 billion rand, which is infrastructure investment. Now, this is a good thing because it literally means they're going to, instead of blowing the money away on parties and consumption, they're now going to start investing in building long-term infrastructure, which is a good thing for me, at least. One area that they're going to focus on specifically is turning around municipalities and parastatals. They specifically mention Eskom, they specifically mention South African Airways, and they specifically mention a couple of municipalities, but the principles are going to be applied throughout the country. Firstly, Eskom. There's a lot of trouble, and Tito Mboweni said it's time that government starts getting much more directly involved and making sure that Eskom does not get involved with another Gupta Gate scandal. Second thing, South African Airways. They've identified a couple of profitable flights, routes that they're going to focus on more. They're going to identify and stop international and local routes that are running at an operating loss, which is just good business. In order for them to actually achieve this, they will have to sit down and in all likelihood consider an entirely brand new board of directors at South African Airways, but it's possible. So I do have a glimmer of hope, but to me at this stage it's all talk and I want to see action first. Municipalities, they are going to specifically focus on trying to settle municipal debts, employ key and skilled individuals in positions that can actually get the work done. And I'm of the opinion they should get rid of individuals that have been working there, drawing a massive fat salary and not doing anything. So that's one way that they're actually going to approach the municipal struggles that find themselves in, and with good governance this can be turned around. Our business models are essentially working in a very good position. It's the people charged with those positions that aren't doing their jobs correctly, and because of that the country finds themselves in that trouble. I quote Tito Mboweni, specifically regarding municipalities and infrastructure. "We must repair our towns and our streets and fix the pipes under our roads. National Treasury will work closely with the Department of Corporate Governance and Traditional Affairs to deal with the financial misconduct in all spheres of government. We are developing measures to improve transparency and governance processes. Key is the employment of qualified, competent and incorruptible officials. We need to restore a culture of compliance with the PFMA and MFMA in all organs of state." Strong words, very honorable principles and intentions. I would love to see this actually happening. Alright, so then he went on to talk about government spending. I quote, "The consolidated budget deficit is estimated at 4% in 2018-19, compared with the 2018 budget projection of 3.6% of GDP. Now that's an increase of 0.4%. Now that does not sound that much, but bear in mind that every increase in budget deficit means the government has to go on loans, which is expensive. The taxpayer has to pay the interest essentially, and eventually it means government has to start generating more revenue, so they have to increase taxes in some way, or ideally just stop spending so much, reduce the cabinet size. We don't need 75 ministers. I continue. After rising to 4.2%, the deficit stabilizes at 4% in the outer years. Outer years meaning 5 years or so going forward. Gross debt is on pace to stabilize at 59.6% of GDP in 2023-2024. 60% of our GDP. Government owes 60%, or they're going to owe 60% in 5 or 6 years from now, of the entire economy. My question is, who are they owing this to? What's the costs involved? And how are they going to operate in order to reduce that? Because that is not sustainable. Bear in mind that a 60% of GDP essentially means that government has to pay interest of anything from 5 to 10% of the country's GDP, which means that's just interest. Where does that come from? The taxpayer. Where does the taxpayer get it from? We have to find a way. But in general, that is the principle, that not the interest on those loans are getting too high, in my opinion. Then they spoke about 3 items that will be added to the zero rated list for VAT. Now, these 3 are 3 types of lists for VAT. Items where VAT is not charged, in other words, non-VATed or exempted from VAT items, where items are charged at 0% and where items are charged at 15% currently. Now, there's 3 items been added to the zero rated list. Now this just means that there's VAT on there, but they're charged at 0%. Now these 3 items are sanitary pads, bread flour, and cake flour. Now sanitary pads, I can support that. I understand where they come from, and actually I think that's a good thing that they're actually doing for the community. Bread flour, yes, a lot of people can't afford to buy bread, so they buy bread flour and they bake it themselves at home. It also lasts longer. But the third one, I don't understand why. Cake flour. Cake is a luxury. Why cake flour? I don't understand that. But it wasn't my decision to make. The decision was made. That's the impact. That's the decision that was made. And they expected that by adding these 3 items to the zero rated list, that the revenue tax that SARS is going to generate from that in VAT is going to be reduced by 1.2 billion rand. That means essentially that the poor of our country will have an additional 1.2 billion rand in their pockets, which is a good thing. Then they also talk about an increase in carbon tax and how to they have a higher rate as a penalty for emissions that exceeds the carbon budget. So if you have a car with a higher emissions, you're going to pay more tax on that. So then they focus specifically on, Tito Mboweni goes on to talk more about this corruption thing I mentioned before, but then they also expressed thanks and gratitude, and he says expressing appreciation to staff members of National Treasury. And the last couple of months, actually, I think Treasury's been doing a good job. The South African Revenue Services, for the most part, I agree. There are certain individuals with whom I will not be sharing my appreciation for. And then the finance family institutions. This is the banking sector in the country. So all in all, I think this is a very interesting budget speech, and it will be useful to see what comes from this. There will be another tax update or budget update. I will add that in February after the budget speech, but for now, if you've enjoyed this video or you like the content of the video, please click on the like button. It really tells me, just gives me that feedback. Additionally, if you like the content and the type of content on my channel, please take a look at, please consider subscribing. I will add a link. There should be a little button right here, as well as I'll be adding a link at the end of this video. Also, there should be a button below the video, a little red one. Please click on that, subscribe, and if you click on the notification bell, if you see it, YouTube will actually let you know every time I upload a new video, which is, by the way, every Friday morning around 8 o'clock. My name is Jacques Taljaard, and on this topic of the mini budget and hope for the country's economy going forward. I hope you have a great weekend.